I'm gonna just go right back to back and bring on Matan from Factory. What's up?
Hey, man, how's it going?
Welcome. Is what I probably should have said.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to do finally a joint event, Factory and Factorial.
I
It's been a
know.
long time coming.
We've created sufficient confusion, or alignment maybe is probably better.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's great to see you. So, I'm super pumped to have you. Also, I feel like now I don't know if the time zones, we made this thing global. So we started with people presenting in Paris and Germany, and then kind of New York, and now we've got like San Francisco awake, and we're starting to see. I think we just passed 5,000 people during the last Q&A. So I'm excited to have you share a bunch about Factory with this group of people. So first of all, what's the product? Because I think some people, I know what Factory is, I know many people know, but can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and
Yeah.
Sharon?
Yeah, absolutely. So Factory is building the first agentic development environment, which is a place for developers to collaborate and delegate with agentic AI. And so generally we're focused on working with enterprises. But I think something that we're really excited about over the next few weeks is going more and more towards, open source maintainers, smaller teams and that sort of thing, especially because, working with the enterprise, we've seen that the platform that we've built is very powerful for accelerating not just coding, which is kind of what most of the, AI code gen tools out there are focused on, but really the entire software development lifecycle. So going from understanding your code base and the constraints and the problems that you want to solve to planning what your course of action is, how to build new features, and then actually the coding itself, of course, as well as the maintenance, right? So, making sure you can quickly RCA any issues, making sure you have nice and clean documentation. These are things that when you have a better understanding of the entire engineering system, you get better at all of these tasks, not just the coding.
And I would imagine that, this is, do you see it as having like a higher scale impact on smaller teams, just in terms of like the percentage of the AI coder to human coder relationship, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's somewhat hard to say in terms of there are some things that small teams just don't even consider doing because of how quick they need to move and how resource constrained they are. So something that we've seen a lot with some of the smaller teams that we work with is, we'll talk to them about their documentation and they'll say, oh, our code is our docs, which is another way of saying we just don't have enough time to actually write out thorough documentation. So to some extent, you could say, okay, they're not doing it, but we enable them to do the things that they really should be doing, but don't have time for. And then on the other hand, there are also just so many like low-hanging fruit or backlogged issues that these small teams don't have the time to work on because they're just higher priority things that are breaking issues like in production for their customers they have to focus on. And Factory really enables them to tackle all of these things while still focusing on the maybe these breaking issues in prod or the P0 things that they're focused on.
So is there any, I would imagine people are listening to this and picturing, I mean, there's a lot of AI coding tools, right? There's
Yep.
Cursor and Devin and V0, and we're now like seeing people's workflows, like, build it in Replit and do a git pull and then kind of move to Cursor or move to Windsurf. Can you either, is there something you can share where people can see it, or can you kind of help us get a sense of what Factory is? Because it's kind of different.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe first I'll just say a little bit and then I'll share a video real quick. So at a high level, there are these tools that are kind of very delegate point and shoot agents. So it's like, hey, go and do this, submit a PR, let me know when you're done. And then there are the more like hands-on tools, which is like the AI IDEs or the ChatGPT like experiences. What you get with Factory is kind of the mix of both, where you're not purely tied to your local environment, nor are you purely tied to your remote environment. But in Factory, you can actually use both. And at the same time, you're not purely tied to collaborating and doing a chat back and forth, nor are you purely tied to, point and shoot and then like see what it does and pray that it worked well. Because if not, then you kind of just wasted your time. In Factory, you can do both. And the important thing is that software development of the future will require both. You will need to dynamically adjust between collaborating on some tasks, maybe it's understanding and planning, and then delegating certain sub-steps that you're confident that the agentic system can solve. And so to be a little bit more concrete, let me share a little video that Francesca from our team recorded last night, solving a GitHub issue for our friends at Lightpanda. So I added this. I'm not sure if we can play this now, but so here we have this, and so let me just scroll back real quick. So here we have this GitHub issue. We want to implement MIME sniffing to determine the MIME type of a given resource within Lightpanda. So let's take the link from this issue, and right now we're in the factory platform here, and let's paste that in. And so we pasted in, mention this is the repo that we're going to be working in, and now we can see exactly what we're. I want to make sure you can read this, right? The quality here is.
I can't see the actual text. I wasn't sure if it was sort of like purposely obfuscated to. But it's.
I hope this is not.
I can see sort of the general layout. So on the left, you're chatting with it. On the right, it's like thinking, and at the bottom, it looks like there's a chat field.
Exactly. And so so I'm not sure if this is a streaming quality, but basically, we're going in and saying, hey, we want to solve this issue. Can you let me know how we might go about doing this? First we have this first pass. It's going to make an edit to. It's actually even hard to narrate over this because it's a little bit hard to see. But at the end of the day, we're going to be editing 2 files to go about implementing this this fix for the MIME sniffing. And at the end of this, what we're going to get is you get to see the diff compared to the original setup that we had, and we're going to ask Factory, okay, this looks good. Can you go ahead and submit a PR? And I can share the actual link to this.
That when you zoomed in, I could see the words actually.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna share the link with you just as a.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so what we get is, and this is now in public on the repo here, but we can see our PR that goes in and does indeed add this MIME sniffing. And so this is just an example of. And hopefully you can see that as well. So here's the 2-file diff.
Yeah.
Those were the 2 files that were involved within Factory. And this is just kind of a little sub-sample of the types of things that we expect open source developers to use this for, which is, I think, a common pain point that a lot of open source maintainers have is there's just like a million backlogged GitHub issues. And some you can solve, but you don't have the time to do it, or roughly how you would do it, but you just don't have the time to parallelize. And that's really where we see Factory as being extremely helpful.
Do you imagine at some point people submitting an issue, and then these agents are kind of pulling, like trying to solve them and kind of doing the PR themselves, or like what is the future of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, again, I hope the viewers are able to see the text, but that's basically what just happened. All the guidance that was given was, hey, can you solve this issue? And then the next piece of guidance was, okay, can you go and submit a PR? And so realistically, what you can do is, if you're an open source maintainer and you want to just get way faster going through all of these issues, you can set it up such that instead of you saying, go create a PR, you just do it automatically. So every time an issue comes in, hey, let's generate a first pass solution. And that saves, even if it's not 100% right every single time, that saves 80 to 90% of the work up front, which allows you to get way more done. And so I think short term, that's just the reality today. I think long term, there's going to be a huge number of issues that a human doesn't even need to touch, because also within Factory, you can execute code. So if you want to implement one of these changes, but aren't sure if it's going to break things, from Factory, you can actually go and verify these things. So you're not just kind of shooting from the hip on code changes, but you're actually verifying that it passes certain tests, certain acceptance criteria.
That's really cool. And so, and you've, we talked a bit about kind of how it's particularly useful for open source. Open source is, tell me if I'm wrong here, a newer, when we talked about enterprise at the beginning, a newer group for you. So how do you think about like what the pricing tiers are for these for the obvious different customers?
Yeah, this is a great question. So part of why I was really excited to come here is to announce that we're actually going to be giving Factory for free to all open source maintainers. partly as a way of giving back to the community, because I think, myself and the entire Factory team, my co-founder was at Huggingface prior to starting Factory with me. We've benefited so greatly from the open source community that this is something that we wanted to do as a kind of a nod of respect and appreciation. And so for anyone who's out there who's an open source maintainer, if you go to factory.ai/OSS, you can just throw in your application, and we'll be giving everyone free access to Factory, just so that the open source software that we all know and love can be maintained that much easier and that much faster.
So first of all, that's awesome to offer it for free. What's your thinking on this? Is because we were talking a lot about business models with Factory isn't natively open source, right? And you guys,
that's right.
And up until this conversation, we've talked with a bunch of companies that are building open source. Why did they do this thing? Which is basically why did people give things away for free, right? So there's like freemium models where you pay to charge them. It's kind of interesting that you're doing this in open source, partly because it's actually verifiable that something's open source. Whereas, if you said, hey, we're going to give this for free to nonprofits, you'd have to verify that they are actually doing that. Open source is almost definitionally verifiable. What's the logic here? Is it get feedback from the open source community? Is it like people are going to see? I mean, if I'm like not cynical, but like an advantage I can manage this is if I have a Factory AI agent submitting PRs, then people learn about Factory, and that's
totally
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely some added benefits for us. So from one perspective, it's like open source developers tend to sometimes be the most opinionated. And from our perspective, we want to make the best product. And so getting really opinionated, really stubborn developers to have access is a benefit for us, because if they're like, hey, I don't like this thing, they'll be very vocal about it, which I think is great. On the other hand, most of our sales motion is to the large enterprise, which is great and fun, but I think it's just a very different profile. And I think for us, the entire software community, so many of these enterprises that we work with are using a lot of these pieces of open source software. And so at the end of the day, it's kind of an ecosystem that does come back around and kind of raise everyone at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think because of the background of so many folks on the team, because of how we've all benefited, because of, as I mentioned, also just the really good product feedback that we would get, it's kind of just a win-win and just something fun that we're all pretty excited about. And I think I'm personally excited just to see the ways that the open source community use it, especially because, there are these ideas about the first single person unicorn, right? Mm-hmm. Like these companies, like the single person, like kind of supporting this massive company, let's say. But I think small examples of that exist already are like these single developers who maintain enormous pieces of open source software. And that's not as sexy and not as flashy because it's not this new company necessarily from scratch, but there's probably so much software that relies on single developers in the open source community that I think they deserve some attention. And so that's kind of
I hadn't thought of, I mean, you said a couple of things in there that I just want to kind of highlight for myself. One is, when people talk about these sort of these solo $1 billion companies, the measure they're using, they're like implicit in the sentence is valuation. But when we think about, and so many, I mean, like I think about Android and these developer, Fast, all of these open source projects that have gotten massive, meaningful scale.
Like the world runs on them.
Exactly. And it's sort of interesting, like, are you measuring the number of devices they're installed on? Are you measuring the number of developers who rely on them in some amount of code, right? Because like actually when you're doing open source, often the person you're building for is like the developer who doesn't have the time to build the thing that you're building, or doesn't have the know-how, or that you ran into a problem and you just want to create the solution. So I think that's interesting. Also, a thing that you said that reminded me of, there are a lot of consumer grade products. Slack was like consumer grade, and then eventually went into the enterprise. And as a result, you talking about sort of sharpening the product. Yep. Design partners you're sort of selling to, but also they may, like, the friction there is high versus if somebody is really, Git pulling your project and natively, not even the community of contributing to it, but the community of contributing feedback. I would expect that the product ends up really, really sharp because it sort of has to be. That's interesting. Look, I appreciate that you joining Glosaic today. Factory.ai/OSS. And we'll make sure that when we share this out, we put the high quality video in so that we can all
amazing
the demo. Thanks so much, Matan.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.